Good evening, good afternoon for all of you. Let's get started with today's meetup. Welcome back to the June edition of the Continuous Testing Meetup. We're happy to have you all here. It has been almost a bit more than 1 month after our last session. So we're really happy to see you all in this rainy day in Berlin. I hope that the weather is much better wherever you are. So let's get started. As is tradition already, we will start with our 5-minute vocabulary session. Oksana will talk today about micro heuristics, and thank you for being here. Oksana, please, the stage is yours.
So, hi everyone. So I start to share my screen. So let's start. So I'm Oksana, and as always, we have 5-minute vocabulary session with me. And today we are going to speak about micro heuristics. I hope it is something new for you. Normally for my 5-minute vocabulary session, I try to use definition in ISTQB based on ISTQB certification program. In case you don't know, it is International Software Testing Qualification Board. It is a qualification program for everyone who is interested in software testing, like software tester, developers, product managers, or any other people from software development or industrial business. If you want to learn more about exploratory testing and microheuristic, it is also one approach from exploratory testing. Feel free to look into foundation extension Agile testers. But if you want to learn more about microheuristic, I would highly recommend to look into a blog from Alexandra Schladebek. She invented microheuristic. She presented it first time at European Testing Conference in Valencia in 2019. And on her website, you can find really a lot of information about what microheuristics are, which types of microheuristics she created, and also other interesting information about it. So, but let's start. As always, we will start with definitions. So only one definition for today. So Alex described microheuristic is a quick way to determine what is my next stage action while testing. A microheuristic is our brain applying what we have just learned to decide on the next step or experiment. So approximately 1 month ago, a development team from my current project came to me and said, "Hi, Oksana, we test exploratory actually every sprint, but by us it is like I'm clicking in the application and I'm waiting until something crashed. It is actually no structure in my steps what I'm doing. Do you have any idea or any approaches how we can structure our exploratory process, testing process?" And I thought microheuristic, it is really something that development team can use to bring more structure to testing process. So I presented it to the team, and I thought it will be also a good idea to present it to you, to the testing community. So let's look into microheuristic. Alex, on her website, she described 10 microheuristics. She called it like collected microheuristics with really interesting names, like pocket till it pops, ifs are iffy, yellow is interesting, fool me once, and other names, as you can see it on the slide. Unfortunately, we have no time to look into all of these microheuristics, but I will explain you the first 3 of them. So the first one is pocket till it pops. Each microheuristic can be described with a four parts, like description, what exactly does it mean, what I observe, what I think, and what would be my next step if I use this microheuristic. So the first one, pocket till it pops. If something seems problematic or interesting, interact with it directly or indirectly to evaluate it more closely and in different situations. For example, if you have a sign-in form with a username and password, and you enter a valid username and password, and suddenly username is disappearing, so you observe a field with an interesting behavior. And you think, it should be, or it may be more interesting behavior here. So you start to evaluate this field or these fields more closely in different situations. So you put a valid and invalid usernames and password, you reset the password or login in and login out and see what's happened. And you do this action until you will find something new, something comes out, or you are satisfied with the result that no other errors or issues will be found. So it was the first microheuristic, pocket till it pops. The next one is ifs are iffy. So in this case, we speak about ifs, about if condition. So if I see that I have dependencies in my application, so some action depends on something else, my next step would be to explore the conditions and the consequences. So I can have a really simple conditions like, if I'm older than 18, I can drive a car. If not, I can't. But for sure, you can have also really complicated if statements or even multiple statements. And in this case, it also increases the chance that somewhere a mistake might have been made. So your next step will be here, try to follow the logical path, so happy path, but also pay attention on else statements and combinations of conditions. And the last microheuristic for today, I really like it. I really like the name arrows by any other name. How elements are named can lead us to assumption about error likelihood. But we can also have actions that actually name differently but do the same things, like yes or no buttons, or okay and cancel, or edit versus modify. In this case, we need to think, is there really differences in these actions, or what else has been done differently in these two areas? Probably because of this mistake or potential mistake would be done by different developers, or lack of domain understanding, or no time for testing. So my next step in this case would be to explore the function itself, what is differently named. Are there really differences in these actions, or are they to observe, to look into different areas across the application? Are they really implemented differently? Is it correct or not? So I prepared a small homework for you. 10 collected microheuristics that you can find on the website. It is probably will also perfectly work for you, but probably for your application or for your program, you have your specific microheuristics. So you just create your own idea and describe it in the same way, like description. What is your idea? What you observe? What you think? And what would be your next step? So you will create your own collected microheuristics that you can use in your project. So thank you very much. And if you have any question or any ideas for the next topics, please feel free to contact me. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Oksana. That was interesting. I never heard about microheuristics before, and that makes a lot of sense. I had no idea she had invented that. So thank you for sharing. Let's move to the next and main topic of today. No, this is not the main topic. this is the usual slide that we have to thank our sponsors, SourceLabs and Trendic. So thanks to them, we have the ability to schedule these meetings and meetups, to have the Zoom link working for everyone, and afterwards to share the video with the people who didn't attend. So that's the main thank you. We are also able to send sometimes little swag and gifts for the speakers, and in general, yeah, thank you to our sponsors. Today, we're having someone who is giving his second talk in the continuous testing meetup. So it's someone who has supported us since the beginning of this online experience due to the pandemic. And ideally, we wanted to have him in the second meetup that we were going to hold in London. But yeah, like things happened, as we all know. And then Thomas was very happy to share his knowledge with us about 10 months ago. But the pandemic has evolved, things have improved a bit, but still we're not able to meet. So he's here again to share his knowledge with us. And he's going to talk to us about the test of a syndrome of a poor quality culture, which I find extremely interesting, that teams still give testing to only a few people or just one person in the team. So I think Thomas will give us good insights about this topic. And I only have words of gratefulness. Thank you, Thomas, for being here again. And I hope that the third one, we actually can do it in person in London in the next time. So yeah, the stage is yours. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'll share my screen. It does mean that if there's a third one, I'm going to have to come up with a third topic to present, which is no guarantee. So let me go for this desktop, and hopefully you can all see my screen. And I'll just do that. Great. Okay, so thank you for all coming along today. My name is Thomas, and today I want to talk to you about ready for test and how it could be a symptom of poor quality, and more generally, these sorts of quality gates where we rely on a subsection of our team to make sure we're hitting our quality targets. And as I say, that could be a symptom of a poor culture within your team in regards to quality. So I want to start with 3 ideas. So the first is that quality is everybody's responsibility. Everyone has a role to play in ensuring the quality of the project we deliver. It cannot be down to one or one subsection of the team. The second is that everyone can test. Testing at its core is about asking questions. A QA doesn't have any particular special skill when it comes to asking questions. Yes, they might know some particular techniques, but everyone on the team is capable of asking those questions. And finally, the third idea is that we don't work on the space shuttle. Most of us don't work on projects that are extremely high risk, where there's a risk to life or a risk to, say, a national economy or the defense of a country. And so we can take calculated risks to improve our processes. So even if you don't agree with these ideas, just keep an open mind as I go through this talk, and just keep them in the back of your mind as I go through. So in case you haven't come across this idea of ready for test, or perhaps you've seen it by a different name, what really is it? Well, at its core, ready for test is a queue of work that's ready for testing. Now, technically, anyone could come along and pick up items from this queue and start to test them. But more often than not, ready for test and in test and columns like it on your sprint boards or Jira boards are seen as belonging to the QA on the team or the QAs. And in my experience, ready for test does come with some significant flaws, which I'd like to show you in this example. So here's my team. And this team is a typical Agile team made up of all the different roles you might expect. You have a delivery lead, a BA, some developers, maybe a designer, and you have a QA. And this team only has one QA. And that's fairly typical in Agile teams. We don't tend to have now these massive QA teams with multiple people. It tends to be a small section of the team that's outnumbered. And this is their sprint board. So if you just take a moment to look at this sprint board, what jumps out at you when you look at it? Just keep that in the back of your mind. What, when you look at this board, do you think could be a problem or not working so well? And this is towards the end of their sprint. And so we get to the end of the sprint and we get into a retro. And in the retro, the first thing that comes up is that they didn't release much, which is a fair comment. They only released one ticket. And then someone else happens to mention that QA was a bottleneck, which I also think is fair. And there's a suggestion that perhaps work in progress limits could help relieve the pressure on the QA and the team. Maybe there can be limits on how much work can be in progress at any one time or how much work can be in that ready for test column. But these, I feel, only really put a plaster over the actual problem, which I believe the QA is asking, which is why are they the only one doing the testing on the team? If we look at that board again, we can see that the ready for test column only has one face on it, and it's the QA's face. They're the one taking all the tickets, verifying that they meet the requirements in that in test column. And because of that, it's slow. There's only one QA in this team, and there's many other people generating work to be tested. So it takes time, it slows down release. And why is he the only one doing the testing? And the answer when I speak to teams and individuals quite often is because they're the QA. There's a problem with this idea of being a QA because it stands for quality assurance. So there's an assumption that the QA on the team should be assuring quality. They should be checking, policing quality. But hopefully, as some of us on this call might understand, being a QA is much more than that. Because QAs don't own quality, the team owns quality. It's simply not possible for one person or multiple people in the team to own the quality of everything everyone does. Everyone in the team has their own part to play to ensure that we all meet those ideals of quality that we want to hit. And I'd also like to ask some questions just around the wisdom of ready for test. The first being, why does the QA do all the testing? As we've already discussed a little bit, everyone on the team has a contribution to make. And in fact, when it comes to testing, having multiple people make a contribution is only a positive thing. We get to draw on the benefits of multiple people's experiences and viewpoints. So it makes our testing more in depth, it gives it more angles, which means we're going to catch more defects. And why is the testing done after the development? We've seen it in textbooks, we've seen it in meetup talks, we've seen it at conferences. The earlier we detect defects, the cheaper they are to fix. And there's a simple reason for this. If we start at the beginning of the scale, if someone is working actively on the ticket in the moment and someone points out a defect in their approach, they can quickly fix that defect. They can make changes before it's even released. Compare this with if a defect is perhaps caught as a bug 2 years later, then maybe the person that worked on that feature is no longer in the organization or working in a different team. Maybe someone else is going to have to investigate and figure out how that part of the system works and how they might fix that part of the system. That's going to take more time. And that means it's going to cost more money to fix. And why are test concerns separated on the sprint board? Separation on paper is going to encourage separation in our behavior. If we see separate columns on the board, ready for test, in test, separation in our process, it's going to encourage us to think of QA as separate, as owned by particular people, by specialists on the team, as something that doesn't belong to the entire team. It's going to encourage that throw over the fence mentality that I'm sure a few of us have seen in the past. And so ready for test as a QA can start to feel a little bit like this. It can start to be really frustrating. We lose understanding because we're not involved early on in the development work. We end up being involved after the development work. And so we have to ask questions and inquire to try and figure out why certain decisions were made. Maybe those decisions don't help with the testability of that feature. There's no early testing because the development work has been done. And in this team, we have this culture, which is partly driven by that ready for test column, putting that separation in place, of letting the QA do the testing. So the testing is done after the development work is done. And this can lead to a bit of a ping pong effect, where the QA finds a problem, a defect, with the work, it goes back to the person that worked on it. They fix the defect, it comes back to the QA, and they find another defect, and so on, and it starts to go back and forth. And this is really frustrating, not just for the QA, but also the rest of the team, because everyone on the team just wants to release good work, and it can start to cause friction in the team. The QA can be seen as being stubborn or blocking the process. And so finally, this all adds up to having no shared quality ownership. It becomes a bit of a they versus us sort of situation, them versus us. The QA is trying to defend quality while the developers just want to ship things. And that's not a healthy dynamic to have in your team. So what if we were to start to consider removing ready for test? What are the strategies and ideas that we can put in place to give us the confidence as a team to get rid of this quality gate, which is causing this friction? So the first thing I want you to think about is this acronym of TOES. To test together, often and early. Because when we test together, we get multiple viewpoints, multiple angles, and that strengthens our testing. We ask better questions, more diverse questions. And when we test often, we get faster feedback. And when we have faster feedback, it allows us to course correct and change direction faster and easier, which is going to allow us to avoid defects. And when we test early, we find more defects earlier, because the sooner we start testing, the sooner we start to ask questions, the sooner it'll be that we find these issues. So what are some early testing strategies we can put in place then, if we think about testing together often and early? So here's three big ones, and they're not the only ones that you can employ, and I'm sure we could maybe talk about it after this presentation. But there's three that I really like. There's the 3 amigos, which tests assumptions. There's pairing, which tests in real time. And there's spike tickets, which test ideas. In the 3 amigos, you're going to get together as a small part of the team, or maybe the entire team. Maybe the developer that's going to work on the ticket, a QA, a BA. But it could really be any collection of people. And you're going to ask questions about the ticket before work begins. You're going to start to test the assumptions. How well are the requirements defined? How well are the non-functional requirements defined? Are there any test or release concerns that need to be considered? You can start to ask these questions up front to try and catch some faulty ideas, some faulty assumptions in the very ticket, so that you don't start working on something that isn't properly understood. With pairing, we're going to work in real time and test in real time. As a pair, we can look at each other's work and we can catch issues with it. One person could be doing the work, one person could be watching. They might see an issue with some code that's just been written, and they can bring it up, they can discuss. They can also bounce ideas off each other. They can also pair not just on the feature code, but the test code. We already know that developers are capable of writing unit tests. What's stopping a developer from writing a UI test or performance test? What's stopping us as QAs pairing up with a developer to help them write these tests? And then there's spike tickets. Sometimes we just don't know enough about the work we want to do. We have a general idea, but we don't know if that idea is a good one. So we can test the very idea itself, perhaps in a pair. We can get together, we can time box a task to investigate and research an idea and test the very idea itself to make sure it's a good one before elaborating it into a ticket, ready to go through this 3 amigos process and this pairing. So when we start to test early, we start to negate the need for ready for test, because we've already been testing. We've been testing the entire time, from the very start of the process, from the very idea with those spike tickets, all the way through to 3 amigos and in the pairing process. And so when we start to actually adopt this, and when the whole team embraces this approach, I believe it starts to increase the velocity of the team, because we're no longer requiring or relying on one person or one subsection on team, the QAs, to make sure that work is meeting requirements. This is being done with the 3 amigos process, with those tickets that are ready. We can have a discussion around that before the work starts, test those assumptions. People working in pairs can test each other's work in real time. They can ask questions about each other's works. They can spot issues. They can work together on the tests that need to be written. And you may see actually a couple of the tickets here, they're not working in pairs. And that's okay too. Sometimes, as we understand as QAs, risk is part of the equation. If something is sufficiently low risk, maybe we as a team are comfortable enough with that change being made by one person and being released and checked through our automated checks. And if it goes wrong, we can quickly correct. But the problem with this, and the problem I had with this when I started to think about the ideas around not having ready for test, myself as the QA perhaps letting go of that role of checking all the requirements have been fulfilled, is what happens to the QA role. As one person once told me in a team, it sounds like I've talked myself out of a job. But actually, I believe I've talked myself into a better job, a more valuable job for myself and for my team. A new role of a quality advocate, someone that uses their expertise to lead the ideas within the team around testing, to bring their experience and the things they've learned from other projects and from meetups like this one. Someone that can coach the team so that the rest of the team can learn these testing ideas and why testing is so important by pairing with them, doing presentations. And then finally, using my foresight to plan a better path to testing in the future. How can things change and improve over time? And so how can I lead with expertise? Well, firstly, you could perhaps test the high-risk features. Yes, I've talked about pairing and three amigos and all these other ideas, but sometimes, even with all of this, we still want to be extra certain that we've done everything we can to test this feature because it's particularly high risk. At that point, as the QA in the team, you may decide to lend your expertise because you do know a few additional techniques that the rest of the team might not know around testing to do that extra additional check. You can do discovery work. So instead of checking requirements, you can be doing discovery work about how to better test in the future. And you can bring that learning back to the team. You can set up infrastructure and process. One thing I like to do with teams that I think a lot of teams struggle with is to help them improve their test environments, make them more stable, make them more reliable, so you can improve the quality of test results overall and help your team test faster and better. You can advocate for new testing techniques. Perhaps, like today, you've come along to a meetup or you go to conferences, you've learned some new techniques, you can advocate for those techniques if you feel the team will benefit. And you can provide good examples of testing, both ones you find internally within your organization, but also ones you find externally as well. So how can you better coach your team? Well, the one we've already talked about is pairing. Pairing is really powerful as a QA. You can pair, say, with a developer on the feature work, and you could learn about how that feature is being put together. You can also ask questions about how the feature is being put together in regards to testability. Maybe a different approach could be taken to make that feature more testable. And you can also pair with that same developer on the tests for that work. You can help them learn about the test suite. Maybe you can help them learn not just about unit tests, but about UI tests, security tests, performance tests. You can help spread your knowledge to the rest of the team so that they don't rely on you quite so much to do those checks. You can review tests as well. You might decide to use pairing and raise a ticket on your board to review a particular part of the test suite to see if there's anything that can be improved, checking the health of that test suite, while also using it as an opportunity to learn together. You might also find that pairs in your team, when they're not working with a QA and they're responsible for writing their own tests as well, might come to you and ask you to review the tests, particularly if they're new to this technique. And so you can do that and you can point out ways that they might improve. You can run team ceremonies. Running team ceremonies is a really sneaky way to make sure that quality concerns are being fully considered. If you're running the stand-up or you're running the retrospective or the sprint planning, you can introduce subtle bits of conversation to make sure that people are considering quality. If you run that 3 Amigos session, you can make sure the questions are being asked about quality concerns. And you can also just do some direct coaching. You can present learning sessions, contribute to knowledge guides, or run workshops. You can do that in lunch and learn sessions if you have them internally, or just within your team or with multiple teams. In the past, I've worked with teams where the QA from another team might come in and present about something they're doing, and I might, as in return, go to their team and present about something we're doing, sharing knowledge in the organization and coaching everyone and helping everyone understand the importance of testing. And then finally, how do you bring your foresight? How do you provide a better roadmap for testing in the future? So you could liaise with other teams in your organization, learn how they test, what works for them and what doesn't work for them. You can review user feedback, and not just review it, you can also find it. I used to work in an Xbox team that worked on games, and one QA in the team would go to all the different message boards, to Reddit, wherever he could, looking for feedback from people that actually played that game, looking for potential bugs, looking for potential improvements. And rather than just look at that feedback and do nothing with it, he would bring it back to the team. He would raise tickets with links to that feedback for it to be discussed with the team. Maybe that could come in a future update. Maybe that's a serious bug that multiple users have reported. That's really valuable stuff that you as a QA can be doing. You can attend meetups and conferences like this one and learn from your peers, learn about what's happening within the QA industry right now, and are there any ideas you can take back to your team? You can develop test roadmaps and strategies, and you can do that with your team. You can pair with someone else in your team to do that, maybe a developer, maybe the product owner, maybe the delivery lead, the BA. You can use that as an opportunity, not just to try and map a better path to testing in your team, but also to highlight the importance of testing to particular team members. Certainly something I've done in the past with teams where they've had this sort of quality, throw over the fence mentality that's not been so positive, is actually find the developer or the person in question that is particularly resistant to the idea of testing being the responsibility of all, and finding opportunities to pair with them and talk about testing and have that discussion and learn from each other. Why are they so resistant? And then finally, you can do some gap analysis. You can look at your test suite as a whole, and you can see if there's any gaps or there's any weaknesses. Maybe the performance tests are particularly weak in your project. Again, something I've done in the past is work with a developer on improving performance tests as a pair. And it's really beneficial because they can learn from me how the performance tests are put together, what frameworks we use, what challenges there are, how it might be improved, and they can bring any knowledge they have. But also, I can learn from the developer how they investigate performance issues on the project. What do they look for? What logs do they find important? Maybe that's something I can bring back to the testing. Because ultimately, you as a QA in your team have more to offer your team than just checking tickets. Everyone on the team is capable of asking questions, whether they're technical, non-technical, QA or not a QA. So everyone can check tickets and check requirements. It doesn't need you as a special person, the only person who can sign off on things. Yes, some tickets are more technical in nature, and they may require someone more technical to review and sign off on them. But that doesn't need to be you. That could be one of the developer's peers. They could look at that ticket and make those checks. There are things that you can be doing instead, like we've just spoken about, that are much more valuable for your team. So to wrap up, I want to revisit these 3 ideas that quality is everyone's responsibility. Hopefully, having listened to this talk, you'll realize that as the QA, you cannot possibly take complete ownership of quality on your team. It just won't work. Everyone needs to play their part to make sure that quality is being delivered on. And everyone can ask questions. The more diverse question set we get, the better our testing becomes, the stronger it becomes, the more defects it will catch. And you don't work on the space shuttle. you don't probably work on very critical systems. And so you can take some calculated risks to improve your process. If the likes of Amazon, a massive website with massive impacts, if they go down to their revenue, can still take some calculated risks, then so can we. So instead of ready for test, think of toes, think of testing together, often and early. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Great talk. If anyone has any questions but is not able to ask them themselves by unmuting, just write them in the chat and I can ask for you.
Hey, I'm sorry, I came a bit late, so I've missed, unfortunately, I missed the beginning of your talk. When you talk about testing, what is your definition of testing? Like only UI testing, testing only automatically, manual tests? Like where does it start and where does it stop?
Sure. So for me, testing is a holistic thing. Testing incorporates all sorts of challenges. Yes, it's automated testing in terms of the UI security, both functional and non-functional, but it's also manual testing as well. And it's also, finally, the other bit, the sort of soft skills bit, which I've been talking about in this presentation, about encouraging the rest of your team to take testing and quality concerns seriously, being that advocate for the team. So it's multifaceted, it's a challenging role, and that's why companies look for really good testers, because I personally believe really good testers understand that it is that multifaceted role.
Yeah, thanks. I was asking because being a developer myself, I know it from the other side. And for example, I've worked with several teams who still keep this ready for test column due to manual testing. They try to do what they can with automatic testing, unit testing, integration tests, pack tests, whatever. But they usually always keep the ready to test for the last manual testing that should still happen according to their agenda.
Yeah, and I agree. Manual testing should definitely still happen, but there's nothing stopping manual testing happening within that pair for the first thing. So whether that's a developer and a QA pairing on a ticket, whether that's two developers or a developer and a BA, whatever, because we're Agile, we're a bit fluid in our role definitions. That still can happen when that pairing is taking place, that manual testing. Now, one of the things I did talk about is that occasionally you may have a very high risk ticket that you want that additional level of assurance. You want that third set of eyes to look at it, whether that's a QA specialist like myself or just someone else on the team. Well, you still don't necessarily need the ready for test in test columns for that. You could just assign the ticket to that third person, put a little comment on there saying, we would like an additional check because this is really high risk. So that's what I would do in that situation. But this doesn't work for everyone. That's why I sort of said about taking calculated risks. You might try this as a team and find that it just doesn't work for you. And that's okay. I've worked in teams in the past that for government and government projects. And it's a struggle to get teams in government projects to consider this approach, partly due to the risky nature of some of the work, but also it's just a cultural thing in those organizations. And so, it doesn't always work out.
I still like the idea of integrating it into pairing earlier. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
We have a question from Airtekers. They ask if this is related to the modern testing approach.
Yes, I think it is. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to interpret what the modern testing approach is, but yes, I believe so. I think what we're seeing is a shift from the old style of testing, which perhaps was a bit more associated with a waterfall approach, where you had these large testing teams full of testers. And when the developers finished a piece of work, they could pass it over to this testing team and they would internally figure out who's going to do the testing and how it's going to be done, and they would sign off on it and say, yes, this was passed or this has failed. And instead, we're moving towards this more buzzword sort of shift left approach to testing, where you don't have so many testers on the team. And so it's no longer possible for that tester to check and verify everything. And instead, they move into what I believe is this quality advocate role, where instead they look for ways to add more value to their team than just checking the requirements, and rely on the team to take their fair ownership of some of that work as well.
Thank you very much. I also have a question, because I really like the separation on paper encourages separation behavior quote from you. And I thought about my own organization, and I realized we have a separate board for our bugs, and only a select few regularly go to that board. And I thought maybe this is also an area where we have to be more inclusive, let's say. Do you have any tips on how to handle bug boards, or in general, how to incorporate them into the sprint?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually worked in teams where they also do similar things. They have perhaps a separate backlog for bugs, and maybe they do hardening sprints or those sorts of activities. And that can work for some organizations. But what I think is happening there is it's kind of a way to make the team feel a little better psychologically. If you've got lots of bugs, if you can hide them in a different board somewhere else, and maybe think about them at a later date, you can still feel really positive about the work you're producing. So I think part of the challenge is to try and re-educate members of the team that bugs and defects are not a reason to be disappointed in the work that's being produced. They're just a natural part of software development. I've also worked as a developer in the past. My work was never right the first time round. I'm not a super developer that just writes code and out it comes and it's perfect. I don't think anyone works like that. So I think a big part of it is to start to re-educate the team that bugs are okay and it's fine to have them, and also start to highlight the point, as you say, about if you have these separations in your process or on paper around how bugs are going to be handled and how test concerns are going to be handled, then it's going to encourage that separation within the team. And it's not just QA, it's all sorts of other things. If you have separation in design tickets, then you're going to see design as this separate team that sit over here and work on a MacBook, rather than part of the same team, all with that shared common goal.
Thank you very much.
And also, even if you
if
you keep a separate board, don't make it a select view of developers to have a look on it, but rotate it, because otherwise a lot of people will never know the bugs that show up. And it's a lot easier if you force everybody to have like a week where they are responsible to share the knowledge and responsibility.
That's a great approach. I think I've heard about this from Atlassian. I think that's how they handle it.
Yeah, definitely.
It definitely helps.
Oh, cool. We have a question from Ahmad, and they ask what you think is the future of testing. So very open question for you.
That is a very open question. That's a hard question to answer. So I think the future of testing, for me at least, is it's definitely going to continue down this path. I don't see teams necessarily ever going back to the older style of having separate QA teams. It does happen in some organizations, and there are some very particular projects that do require it, because if you think about the separation in testing, that sort of pyramid that you might remember from ISEB or ISTQB, where it talks about the degrees of separation in your testing. If you're further away from the work, you're more likely to catch more defects. So if you work on particularly high risk projects, then that might be something that you need. But I think actually it's going to continue this direction. And as well, I think with testers are starting to be asked to do more that would typically be considered development work. So they're starting to be asked questions about how do we manage test environments? Can we manage test environments better with Docker and with Kubernetes? Or how can we manage our pipelines? In fact, just today, I was having a conversation with a client, and they were talking about their HR roadmaps. And what was really interesting for me is the QA roles on there. It went like QA level 1, level 2, level 3 as you graduate through the levels of experience. And eventually you actually shifted away from being a QA completely. And they put you into this box of full stack engineer, because their hope is that not only do you have that specialism as a QA, but you've learned so much in your journey of managing test environments. You've learned a bit of DevOps. You've learned so much in solutions engineering by trying to come up with test frameworks that you've designed yourself or testing infrastructure, that it starts to merge. So I think this sort of trend will only continue. As for other stuff, who knows? I can't predict the future, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we have any more questions. I have one small one. The spike tickets. I haven't heard this word before. It's not really testing related, right? It's just a development method, like a proof of concept for a ticket, or what is it?
Yeah, so a spike ticket, I'm trying to think of other things they're called, but effectively, a spike ticket is where you don't know enough about the problem yet to have a fully elaborated ticket where perhaps a BA or a section of the team have gone away and really defined the requirements and the ask and the business need and all those sorts of things. You just know that you need to do something. So a good example might be, you know that you need performance tests, but you don't know how best to performance test that product or that project. You know of a few frameworks, but you don't know which one's going to work the best. So what you might do is have a time box ticket where you say, I'm only going to spend up to a week on this, setting up proof of concepts, as you say, setting up a couple of proof of concepts, and then looking at them all, reviewing them, and presenting that information back to the team so you can make a decision collectively. Now, what's interesting about that is the example I used was performance tests, because spike tickets can apply to more than just development work. It can be more than just picking out what Q framework to use in your application. It can also be what test framework to use, how might you set up your test environments. And I think spike tickets then, particularly when they relate to test concerns, are a really good way of bringing developers on that journey and bringing them on board to having that shared ownership, because you can include them in the process of making those decisions. Because it works both ways. We want to be included early on in the process so that we know that code that's being developed is testable and easy to test. And it should work the other way. We want developers involved in the process early on so that they have a say and an input into how we might best test as a group.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I think this was the last question. Okay.
I think I just want to add about what Thomas was saying regarding the spike tickets, and this is what we have done. Like in one of the teams I've been working in my current company. For example, we had to test the UI, like what we use for live testing in Sauce Labs, and sometimes you don't know what you have to do, right? So it's really good to have like a spike ticket that you create during the sprint planning, and then you get involved, you get other people to chip in and to give their opinions and how you could like face this, and you have developers and testers working on the same task, and that gives you a really good sense of collaboration and yeah, what Thomas is trying to tell us here about that testing is something that is important for the whole team. So that's a really good thing that maybe folks should try to practice more. This is spiking is really, really useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Will you accept comments, not just questions?
I don't see why not, I suppose.
Well, I just want to affirm everything you talked about does work. I have a team that's done exactly that. Now, it is much easier to start with a greenfield team that is doing new development. It is much harder with more established or legacy teams. They're not going to adapt all these practices, but something we've started working on with other teams is just start with focusing on testing and building your automation test in your testing, and that starts to have a knock-on effect for better practices. Because I ingest work from other teams, but I don't trust what they provide us. So we started writing test against their work, so I can push something back before we even look at it and just say this isn't right. Go fix this before we will even start doing work for you, because it's when you're not being allowed because of cultural, the organization or culture, the culture of the organization, this really helps for teams that use my product, and then also teams that are going to give me work for their needs. It eliminates a lot of the back and forth, and it also helps them start to adapt their own practices and make better, build higher quality. And that is an easy way to start if you are working with more like mature or legacy teams that aren't accustomed to having developers do quality-based work.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience, and yeah, completely agree.
It's interesting that you mentioned not trusting other teams. Last time Thomas was here, he was speaking about contract testing. So I just linked the last time he talked here, and there is a video. So if you don't know about contract testing, it's a very interesting topic. And yeah, thanks everyone.
It's a chronic problem. So yeah. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on it then.
Cheers, thank you. Hopefully I don't contradict myself in the previous talk. That would be embarrassing.
Well, it's a year old, so it's...
Exactly. I can say that I've moved on.
Great. So do you want to add something else, Severin, or should we start wrapping it up? Okay, good. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. That was quite nice. I think it covered all my expectations.
Yes, thank you.
So yeah, as I said, thank you for being here, and then hopefully we can do the third one in person in London sometime. So let me share with you what is coming up next. So if you are wondering how to get access to this talk, to the recording, we're going to post it probably the next week in our website, continuoustestingmeetup.com. So all videos of the previous events are there, and we will have this one pretty soon, so you can share it with your colleagues, or we're going to also post it in the meetup group, so you can have access to it. So don't worry if you miss the first part of the talk or something like that. You will be able to see it all completely when we post it soon. And what is coming up next for the meetup? So in about 1 month, we're going to have Marie Drake talking about accessibility testing, so shifting this type of testing to the left. And it's a topic that has been coming up quite often in the last 2 to 3 years. So you check conference talks, and this is happening more and more often. So she's a person who invests a lot of time in this type of testing. She's invited to many different conferences to talk about this and other topics. So great speaker, and we're looking forward to have her in 1 month. And with that, I just want to thank everyone who was here, and looking forward to see you the next time. Thank you, Thomas, for being here. Thanks, Severin, for coordinating. Thank you, Oksana, for the presentation. And thank you to everyone who asked a question, made a comment, that made this meetup very, very nice, even though we're all remote. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.